Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Making Space, a Radical Rethinking of the Approach to Work-Life Integration in the Arts. My name is Robbie Otley, and I am the Programs and Resources Associate at the Association of Performing Arts Professionals. Before we get started, let's review a few technical items to ensure that everyone is properly set up to participate. So first, we're using a new platform for our webinar for the first time. And although we hope there aren't any major technical difficulties, we appreciate you bearing with us as we start through this process. The first thing I'll note is don't believe you have the option to turn on video, but we are using just the audio for today's webinar. So we'd ask that you don't use the video function there. Although you should be able to see this wonderful slideshow. We'll also have the opportunity to ask questions and provide comments using the chat box and raise hand function. To ensure that the chat box feature is visible, you may need to click the button at the bottom of the Zoom window labeled Chat Box. Within the chat box, check that the Send To drop-down menu says Everyone before you submit. That way we can all see your remarks. If you have comments or questions of a sensitive nature, feel free to send to the moderator by selecting APAP in the Send To drop-down menu. And if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment via audio, please indicate so in the chat box and we'll unmute you. You can also use the raise hand feature by clicking on the participants button if you'd like to share, and we can read questions directly from the chat box as well. Today's webinar features a distinguished group of speakers who will be discussing their experience with work-life integration and facilitating conversation. Throughout the webinar, we'll have several opportunities for Q&A and comments from our attendees, and feel free to use the chat box throughout the webinar, not just during the Q&A. We'll also be recording this webinar to post on our website within the next few days. We're welcoming some new colleagues to APAP in this webinar, so I'd like to take a moment to introduce our organization. The Association of Performing Arts Professionals is a national service and advocacy organization with nearly 1,600 organizational and individual members. Our members include artists, agents, managers, presenters, producers, and others from North America and beyond. We offer many professional development opportunities, such as this webinar, and programming at our annual conference to support today's and tomorrow's arts industry leaders. You can learn more by visiting us online at apap365.org. And our annual conference, APAP NYC, takes place in New York City every January and is the world's leading gathering of performing arts professionals. APAP NYC 2020 takes place January 10th through 14th, so mark your calendars now. So let's kick things off. I'll introduce Krista Bradley, the Director of Programs and Resources, to get started. Krista?
Hey, thanks, Robbie. Thanks, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We're super excited to be featuring this topic, which is a continuation of one of the sessions that we had at this last year's conference. And for those that are new to APAP webinars, or maybe you've been at past webinars, we are trying to find ways to link some of the conference topics that came up throughout our webinar series. So you'll be seeing more and more of these things, particularly around topics that were especially popular at the conference. Robbie already mentioned that we're using a new webinar platform with Zoom, so thanks for your patience with this. We may or may not enter into technical glitches, and just appreciate your patience with that. Because of the nature of the webinar subject, we just want to focus on making this more of a facilitated discussion, and you'll be hearing more about how the speakers want to engage you in conversation throughout this webinar. But this is not a typical webinar where maybe it's all presentation and then Q&A. This is also the first in a series of webinar discussions around this topic. So you can expect to see subsequent sessions around topics that relate to this. And we'll be building on some of the questions and issues that you raise in this webinar to build out the rest of the series. So let us know what additional information and themes may be valuable for the future. So let me introduce our speakers, all three of whom I'm very proud to say are Leadership Fellow Program alumni, or are currently Leadership Fellows program participants. Our speakers today are Lindsay Bostwick, Shannon Judson, and Rena Thompson. Lindsay Bostwick is one of the senior producers at the NYUAD Art Centers after many years producing works in New York City and internationally. From 2010 to 2016, She worked on the producing team of Pomegranate Arts with artists such as Philip Glass, Laurie Anderson, Lucinda Childs, Robert Wilson, and Taylor Mack. Shannon Judson began her relationship with the critically acclaimed Urban Bushwomen in 2001. Shannon has had the privilege of serving the company in several capacities, including company member, rehearsal director, and director for UB2, Urban Bushwomen's Performing Apprentice Ensemble. Shannon now deepens her work with the company as Associate Artistic Director and Coordinator of UBW's facilitation network, BOLD, or Builders, Organizes, and Leaders Through Dance. Rena Thompson is the founder and president of Envision. Over the last 2 decades, she has worked with artists to conceive, produce, manage, and disseminate projects in the realm where music intersects with film, animation, theater, literature, and interactivity. So I'll hand it over now to Lindsay, Shannon, and Rena for today's conversation.
Hello, folks. Shannon here. Really excited to continue this conversation along with Lindsay and Rena and those of you who are on the web today. I want to go back and highlight what Krista just said about this being a conversation. So Lindsay, myself, and Rena, we have experience, lived experience in integrating work-life integration. However, we're not positioning ourselves as the experts here. We really want to be in conversation. So we're facilitating a conversation. We're making space, we're holding a container, and really asking that you bring your conversation, your experience, your thoughts, your inquiries to this. And that's how we'll really populate this conversation. So via the chat function, via the hand raising function that's available on Zoom, it'll be your inquiries and your feedback that will really flesh out how we dive into this conversation.
And one thing I want to point out is that this is really, as Shannon said, really a working conversation. It started as a round table, and we very specifically wanted something that was very live and in the room, that became about the ideas that was brought in by the group together. And we were blown away with the amount of people that came at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and the ideas that really came out of a very quick session. So that is why we decided to continue this conversation, try and get more people involved and see ways that are not just possibly individual experiences, but something that we can start to have visibility and work across the field. Just to kind of read through our initial description, our original goal was to inspire creative and profound ways to reshape static work cultures for greater work-life integration. Using the lens of equity and access, this session seeks to acknowledge and support unique challenges faced by the performing arts professionals and organizations, to identify models and methods for lasting change, and embrace a conceptual shift in thinking about workplaces and spaces.
Hi, this is Rena, and I just want to also emphasize how this is a working conversation. And when we were deciding how we were going to shape this webinar, we asked ourselves if we should be speaking to what has been discussed in the past or if we should start fresh. So for background, we did hold this session at APAP, and it was amazingly interactive. And we had so many takeaways that we decided that we should build from what we've already uncovered collectively and keep moving forward. So just to kind of summarize a little bit about what we uncovered when we were in that session back in January. We talked about possible themes that were coming up amongst people, which, were of all sorts, developing space for creative time, that this was a field-wide issue, considering alternative measures of success, establishing boundaries. There are so many different themes that were possible. As we collectively worked through these ideas, some of the ones that really came to the forefront were about resources. People are the biggest resource. Integrating structures and policies, and that a culture of integration is founded on empathy, transparency, and flexibility. We came upon planning ahead so you can manage your time and draw a strategic plan for both work and personal life. There are a number of themes that were related grouped, but there was just so much to dig into. So what our hope is in continuing this conversation, first with this webinar, but furthermore, perhaps through other webinars or other kinds of platforms, is that we'll still continue to have these conversations and I guess just really, feel whatever shifts are necessary moving forward in the culture that we live and make it a healthier, more sustainable field.
So as we hold the conversations, a couple of things that we're going to ask you to be mindful of. Firstly, speaking from the I. So for us, this is an opportunity for everyone in the, on the chat to be able to center yourselves, ourselves inside of this conversation. So there's no need or responsibilities to speak for the universal you or they, but really speaking from your own lived-in experience. That'll be how we'll be able to get the most juice out of how we gain and can breathe into this conversation from a personal lens. And it'll give us really great learning from people who are actually alongside us inside the field. Respecting timeframes, we really want you guys to use the chat function and also hold and just being mindful that we want to hear from as many of the folks who are on this webinar as possible. Hearing with curiosity and wonder. And lastly, just reiterating that there's no quick fix. We're not expecting that at one o'clock we will have solved it and be able to package it and put it everywhere, but that this is really a working conversation, that this may just be something that flexes the muscles a bit and maybe just raising new questions to take home, to take to your workplace. And that we're willing to be inside of this conversation for a period of time, knowing that it's not, it won't be something that happens overnight. And so there's a little bit more of a long run viewpoint inside of this conversation.
Great. Before we start to open it out to include all of you, we wanted to take a few minutes each to tell you a little bit about why each one of us felt that this was an important topic. For myself personally, I've been in the field now for almost 20 years and have had many various roles, from performer, dramaturg, director, playwright, producer, and now in a university presenting function. And I've been able to kind of see different perspectives. And for me, I find that, we all are working so hard, and there's a lot of high expectations that are beyond a kind of a standard field in terms of working days, nights, and weekends, in terms of the dedication that we put and the priorities. And yet oftentimes we're within structures and organizations that are very similar to a very corporate style model. And so for me, seeing the distinction of the flexibility that we're asked of, but then not seeing that flexibility or not seeing a unique approach, and wondering if there is a different way. And so wanting to really engage in that kind of dialogue was what brought me to want to think about this more and ask the question amongst the field.
Shannon here. What brought me into this conversation is really my my life path alongside Urban Bushwoman. I've been with the company for about 17 years and have been a mother for most of that period. So that meant for me, at one point, I was a very young, at least in New York years, a young mother, and learning from other career models within the company how to navigate that space of being a performing touring artist and a homemaker at the same time. And now on the other end of the spectrum, fast forward some 16 years later, and now being someone that's holding and creating the space for other folks who are similarly holding family, holding other career aspirations outside of Urban Bushwoman, and trying to find balance. And one of the things that I feel really privileged is that I've been able to draw from community organizing models outside of dominant structures, because that's something that's been so grounding for the work of Urban Bushelman as an organizing body. And where I have great curiosity is how to draw from those organizing forms my personal experience so that I can be really intentional and specific in the ways that I'm crafting culture for other artists in the space.
This is Rena. Well, for me, also, it's been about 17 years that, it's been 17 years since I founded Envision Management Production. And there I've been the president, artist manager, producer, really leading my organization and my staff and my artists through a lot of different changes. And this idea of work-life balance / integration has been one that has been on my mind for this whole time. At the beginning, when I was starting things up and being self-employed, like anyone who is trying to get something going, I really did not have a great work-life balance and many times burnt out. And so I had to find ways to rethink that to be able to move forward. And then about 8 years after that, I decided to have a family. And this is where I had to rethink things again, because now I had to think a lot more about work-life integration and how to sort of integrate my family life and my professional life and how to excel at both and be the best person that I could be. And now I'm at a stage with my work that I have a larger staff. I have a wonderful array of projects I'm involved with and amazing artist partners. But I have to really rethink about work-life culture. And my desire in doing so is having experienced different kinds of needs at different sorts of stages in my life and recognizing that the people with whom I share my space are also going through their own different stages of life, and how, as someone who is a leader of an organization, how can I make that space and help them to be their best selves? So thinking about work culture and how it can be inclusive and recognize different needs at different stages of life, how space for people to become leaders is possible when they have so many other things they need to integrate into their daily lives. All of these kinds of things have been ideas that I've reflected on quite a bit, and I'm very excited to be able to have all of you to share this with.
Well, now we'd like to actually have you all spend a couple of minutes writing. Hopefully you have something near you and saying why you are here. We know it's in the middle of the day on a Monday, and wondering why you made this a priority to join this webinar right now. And after you've spent a few minutes kind of processing through that, we'd like everyone, if you feel comfortable, to write either a phrase or a couple of words in the chat function so that we kind of get a sense of why people are here.
Thanks everyone for starting to write in the chat box. It's really great to see the different perspectives. And then if you choose to send something to us privately, we'll share that as well.
We'll give everyone like 1 more minute.
Hi, everyone. This is APAP. I just wanted to read out some of these in case there are folks that need to be hearing some of this, and also because we're recording. It's interesting to see some of the range of topics around pay and low pay. It's interesting to read some of these comments about how integration is a different kind of concept and alignment between your work and your life. there's some specific requests about, what are the resources that are out there, and are there studies or other issues that have come out about this topic, because this is obviously a field-wide topic that really needs sort of field-wide work. We've seen some conversations and comments for those that are creating space for other people that have worked in the field for a while and have younger folks on their teams and wanting to make sure that they can create a space for them to work and thrive in a more healthy way, and looking for resources to do that. I loved the comment about joining this call was really an act of self-care in and of itself, is taking the time out to just focus on this topic. And so some really great issues that are being raised up, as well as just not the work-life integration just in general, but just the fact that our field has moments of intensity in terms of if you're in a show and you have tech week, or you're at a conference and you're working 24 hours a day, how do you balance those things that are sometimes really unconscionable in terms of the hours and time that we're requesting people to give. I just wanted to put that out there, and we'll lead it off to Shannon to take it from here.
Thanks, Krista, for summing some of those up. And what I hear are a couple of buckets, if you will, that we can sit inside of. Life alignment and self-care as one idea, resources and tools, another. The organizational culture, drawing from, there were a couple that talked about this practice that, where long hours, low pay is the standard, that it's assumed that we'll do that for passion. So the organizational culture. And then another one is the specificity of language. What do we mean by by work-life integration? And I think that one's really interesting, because as part of the organizational culture, things can sometimes get named and then lose their specificity. So just wanting to have some clarity around that, like what does that mean? And someone spoke about that meaning different things for different folks. So I'll read through those again, those couple of buckets. And what I'm gonna ask of us to do in hearing those buckets is to listen out for something that you either have a share for, where you can lend a resource, lend an anecdote, lend something that will be food for information for the rest of the group, or where you find an area where you want to take a deeper inquiry, where you find a topic that pushes your practice, or that presents a challenge, and you want to explore that more. So the buckets are life alignment / self-care, resources and tools, exploring the culture and an overhaul of the culture, and specificity of language. What is work-life integration? I'll read those one more time. And again, you're listening for the idea that presents an opportunity for you to share something to the group. Oh, here's a resource that I have. This is something that's working with me and my child. Or something where you want to dig in another layer of questioning or interrogation, because it's really it feels like a hot and juicy spot for you to really peel apart some more. So the buckets are, again, life alignment / self-care, resources and tools, the culture overhaul, and the specificity of language. What is work-life integration?
I'm going to write these down here, and I'll text these to you so we can all know what they are. Oops. Should be to everyone.
And as Rena's doing that, one thing that I also wanted to bring up that happened in our first session in January, and that I would encourage us to have in the space here, is that also part of the reason why we all hope to start this conversation and hopefully some kind of movement, is that it's about providing a space that we can talk about these concerns, but also looking at it from a solution-based inquiry. So what are some best practices or some ideas that either individually or across the field we have of even small or large ways that we can think about change?
So as we contemplate those different entry points, now the space is open to chat in via the hand-raising prompt that Robbie and Krista outlined earlier, where you can actually share your either inquiries or your resources with the larger group. The chat is also still available.
And then again, that hand raising function is through the manage or the participants tab.
Perhaps have a think about, is there one of these buckets, so to speak, that you really contemplate when it comes to this idea of rethinking work culture?
Hi all, and also if anybody wants to be unmuted, we can certainly do that easily. Just send us a quick note.
And as people are gathering their thoughts, I did want to point out an article that was just released, I think maybe yesterday, in Theater Art Life, titled "Performing Arts and Overworked Staff, Let's Not Pretend We're Okay." It just started being shared around on Facebook, and it's quite an interesting article, and really talks at some of one particular perspective on some of the hours and what as a field we have come to think is okay, specifically talking about Tech Week and the long hours and really kind of questioning that. So I'm happy to kind of share that link around if that's something that people are interested in reading about and expanding on.
Now, is there anyone in this group who was really drawn to the idea of life alignment, self-care? There is a lot of messages that referenced the idea of even this is self-care, how to align the different aspects of your life. Is there anyone who really felt that? Thanks, Tiffany.
So if we stick with that bucket of the life alignment self-care, and we work from the idea that we hope both the solutions and also the inquiry, what are some of the things that are the ahas that are working in regards to life alignment and self-care? What are some of the things that that feel like they do create a space of being in alignment or being in concert with things working more holistically?
Actually, I'm quite curious about who's in the room right now. If we have, artists, if we have producers, presenters, if anyone wants to kind of chime in to say where you're coming from, that could be also very helpful to think about these different perspectives. Because I myself am thinking about the idea of life alignment and self-care, and I recognize that the things I'm contemplating in that bucket are, they're quite specific to the kinds of roles that I play. But and I imagine that's sort of sometimes what's tricky about coming to, a blanket solution to anything, is because we're all coming from these different perspectives and having these different kinds of needs. So I think when we talk about or explore all of these topics, it's really important to always think about where we're coming from. We all make up an ecosystem, and it's pretty important for us to all think about, and so I believe that it's pretty important for us to think about where everyone's coming from. Thanks, Tiffany. I see you're an artist and co-founder of a nonprofit. That's sure you have many things to share.
Hi, this is Krista, and I'm going to just, I know that some people are in positions of leadership in terms of running organizations. So I suspect that you have a unique perspective, both a lived experience, but also you're trying to create space to try to address some of these issues. I saw that we also had an HR person on the call, which I'm sure that if she or he doesn't have resources, looking for other ways that people have mastered or navigated this world. I know there were a number of consultants on the call, so I think that that's, for those who've worked in that realm, it's sometimes challenging to balance your time with demands of clients. Hi, Liza.
And thanks for chiming in there too, a university presenter, small team. So you have to have open communication. And I mean, it does seem cliche about communication, but I do really very much firmly believe in the importance of that kind of open communication.
I think also one of the other things that I think is paramount, and it speaks to language, is really how, especially in the arts, titles can mean so many different things and can take on different responsibilities in every single organization. And I feel like we don't talk about it enough. And then we have either double up of energy of people all thinking that they're kind of in charge of the same thing, or also things being dropped because we're in a lack of understanding. And so what are some ways or best practices across the field or different organizations that we can help start those conversations so that we all know coming into what the expectations are, and then that kind of can help create a more sustainable model of who's doing what and what's feasible.
I mean, I'll share something on that topic, just in the idea of, as you say, doubling up, not knowing what people's roles are, and seeking sort of, is there a possible way to make things more efficient or more transparent? So we're just being more effective at what we do, and we're supporting each other as opposed to duplicating each other's efforts. And I can just share that in my organization right now, we're putting a really great emphasis on establishing new internal digital communications and experimenting with a number of different platforms as to how we can keep each other abreast of, in real time, really, of what is going on, to sort of spark collaboration and clarify things along the way, so that we can sort of red flag things before they're problems. Just looking for ways to utilize new technologies in order to do exactly what a lot of them are actually trying to do, which is create a more efficient workflow and more clarity. So that's something that we're doing right now, and it's not an overnight process at all. It takes the commitment of everyone. But I do find that when people adopt the idea, it creates a lot of energy because it involves everyone. Everyone has a say.
There was a question on about how it's working for other organizations. I can speak from the vantage point at Urban Bushman, and I'll speak from when when all things are aligned and when things are working, because it is still a developing practice in terms of putting it into system. But it we really, at best, it's approached as a community organizer, and so. An analogy might be to think about a family reunion and how you think about the different folks who are being invited there and their needs specific to that person. So if I'm planning a family reunion, I'm thinking about a different set of needs for my great-grandmother, and also want the space to be conducive for my children, and wanting to have enough enough responsiveness to that range of humanity. Now, the workspace doesn't necessarily have the same range, but it is made up of individuals. And so when we're working at best, it's paying attention to creating a structure that allows for responsiveness. So it's even with what's helpful for us is that we are a small organization. When an example would be like one of the women in the company right now is able to, she brings her child to rehearsal, and for her that is what allows her to be best invested inside of the work, and to also hold space as a parent in the ways in which she would need. For myself, the need was very different, because actually having my child in the workspace with me created more of a distraction. So it wasn't a blanket decision that said, okay, when you're a mom, your child comes to work, but rather what are the needs for that specific parent-child relationship to best serve the work, and also hold space for the full humanity of that person. So what I think the big give out of that is being able to see individuals inside of the workspace. It might be useful to just take a moment for us to go back to that definition of what is work-life integration. Because as someone mentioned in the chat, it is very different for different organizations. What works at Urban Bushman with our staff size and with the company size might not be relative to folks working at larger organizations. So maybe let's take just a moment to chat down, what does work-life integration mean for you, coming from both the personal, but how it actually makes sense for your workspace.
Again, if anyone wants to share ideas just by asking to be unmuted or writing in the text in the chat box, that would be great. Are there any thoughts anyone wishes to share on that idea? This is actually something that came up during our session at APAP when at the beginning, even, you know, a lot of the mentality was around work-life balance. Even though we did use the language of integration, but automatically, and perhaps it's because it's a more commonly used term or has been, work-life balance was something that retained a lot of focus. But towards the end, there were proposals about how we should really be thinking about work-life integration. And so, in my opinion, it is a little bit more of a newer concept that maybe hasn't been spoken about as much. But from my point of view, it is that idea that our life is our work, our life, all the parts that make us whole are part of one sort of big picture. And how we put them together, if we are open to it, can take a lot of different kinds of shapes. And so being a mother, being a producer, being a leader of an organization, so on. They all have different kinds of demands, but can we in the creative industries also be creative about what shape and how all of those kinds of roles can integrate for ourselves and in relation to others? It's a big question. But that's the idea for me, is about what that idea of integrating is, having all of those parts that create the whole work with each other.
And one kind of story that I wanted to talk about, as I used to be a touring artist, and I used to think, I've worked on this tour stop for a year, making it happen. There's a one-night show, and I didn't even get to meet the presenter. And I don't even know if they saw the show. I don't even know if they like the show. And that felt very strange to me as an artist. And when now that I've been a presenter for 3 years and realized that when you're within a huge organization doing sometimes, hundreds of events a year, and recognizing the family demands and just having creative downtime. And I thought, oh, wow, I never really thought about the presenter's life here. They're not on tour, this is their life. And I thought, is there a way to kind of help create more of a dialogue between the presenters and the artists? Or is there a way that we can have, for example, an afternoon dress rehearsal the day before a show so that the staff at the theater can see it during their work hours? Or are there other creative ways that we can help the people that are building the work be able to experience it?
Thanks, Lindsay. That's really great. Just to be thinking out of the box in a way to, about sharing the creative process at a time when people can actually access it. I did want to share a comment that we received around language and around specificity of language. I think for some on the call, it's helpful if the idea of clarifying titles and roles and responsibilities means a lot, and because oftentimes, because of the nature of our nonprofit world, some people may work across departments or work on various components of projects, all of which have different timelines. And so if we're not being really clear about roles, responsibilities for our staff around projects that might be on two different timelines, it really makes it harder for them to manage their time. And so how can we as organizations have some clarity around those, particularly around staff jobs that might be more of a hybrid, working across departments?
And Tiffany here has posted something here, if I may read it. We found when we collaborate with local artists during residency that helps bridge a different relationship and connection while on tour, and even leads to more future potential work within that community, relationship building, deepening. So yes, I relate to that quite a bit. I feel, it brings about the thoughts about when we work in the arts, who are we working for? And is it for the artists? Is it for the community? Is it for our partners? Is it for ourselves? Is it for our families? And particularly in my own experience, I've loved these kinds of relationships within a community when presenting a performance or touring in any kind of way, because of sort of how it integrates and takes the work that we do outside of a box and allows us to connect with a community more deeply. And I mean, I personally love that kind of integration of community life and the art itself.
And Shannon, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, Shannon and I were in the Fellows small group together, And I was always really impressed by Shannon's very rigorous tour schedule and how she was able to find ways to connect with her family after being gone for a considerable amount of time. If you felt comfortable sharing some of that, Shannon.
Sure. I would say there's definitely not a blanket system, but I hold that as a value. I hold connecting time with my family and being fully inside of my work and my career in a way where I feel fulfilled and successful. I hold those as values. And so based on those being my value set, I craft various different ways to bring those both into play. So an example might be if we're at a city that I know leaves a lot for exploration and fun, then instead of after a 2 weeks stint, instead of coming home, I'll actually build out that next week as family vacay time and fly the whole family to where I am on tour. And so I have the opportunity to share a little bit of my work with them, like maybe they come to a show, but then I have family time thereafter where I'm really just present as mom, as wife, and really inside of what's sacred for that relationship. In terms of on the tour schedule, there's a kind of beauty to the way that the schedule works, and that, you know, there are times when if you're in production mode, you're in intense rehearsals, and then there's that ebb and flow. And so I've learned to really embrace those moments of the ebb and flow of when we're not in rehearsal, when it's not putting up a new production, to really be in, you know, that stay at home, that PTA mom. So on those moments when I'm not in rehearsal every day, then I get to really fully engross myself into the, you know, brownie baking up at the school every day reality that I also want to hold. So for me, it's been a balance of really looking at the curve of what my work allows, and then also holding the value set of what I want for my family in relationship with that.
Thanks so much, Shannon, for sharing that. I find that very inspirational. Absolutely. You know, since we're nearing 1 o'clock already, the time has flown. We want to make sure that we're able to sort of kind of think about, one, we have some more comments that keep coming in, which we can also take a peek at. We want to start thinking about how this can continue beyond a webinar like today, or beyond what took place at APAP back in January. We have had lots of ideas about how we can continue creating a platform for a working conversation, but we're very interested to know what you think. And we'd love if anyone has any thoughts now about how this could move forward. If you could share them, that would be wonderful. You could share them just by speaking up or by sending a message, or later on, if you have an idea, I'll ask APAP to share with all of you where you can send some further thoughts.
Alana just raised a really great point of entry along with that, Rena. She says, I think it might be interesting if we started shifting the narrative by thinking about how many people we hire and about the lives we improve in a macro sense as part of a show and the art we create. Perhaps by making that a data point, we can bring it into conversation with our funders as something to strive for as part of the project. And I think that aligns with something that we had initially discussed in our APAP conversation, which is who needs to define the boundaries, whose responsibility is it to define the better work-life balance and integration. So looking at the systemic ramification of that. So, you know, there's one part of us addressing that from our own humanity here on the call, but also looking at the pipeline of where does this where does this framing really take form, and who should be inside of this conversation in terms of who creates the boundaries.
And just speaking for APAP, and just as we're looking at future resources, future build outs of this webinar series, I wonder if folks have suggestions for things they'd like to see. Do we need to bring on people that maybe have done some more data around it? Or do we highlight, I know in London, there's a bunch of UK theaters that are addressing some of these same issues, and I think that they have some data and some strategies that have worked for that industry. Just wondering, as we start to plan and wanting to build out on this conversation, how we can be helpful with partnering with Lindsay, Shannon, and Rena and others.
And I see this, well, there's so much great stuff coming on here, Jake. Not a silly suggestion, a great suggestion. We have, we created a big Google Doc from our session at APAP, and actually there's so much more in this little doc that we'd like to share with everyone to be able to kind of accumulate the mind, all the thoughts that have come together. So this is something we could explore. I mean, for example, you say some of the questions asked in this conversations, and then people can write responses. Mm-hmm. We have some questions that we collected from our last session, such as what happens when your group does not respect time as a shared value, how to structure empathy and transparency, how to stop competing with your coworkers over who is the most overworked, what does success look like in the cultural shift we want, how do you carve out creative time for yourself each day, how do we empower people to ask for help, and how to cut through the noise of the inevitable crisis. So there's so many questions, and obviously we can't dig as deep as we'd like in a 1-hour session, but this is exactly why we're seeking now to find sort of a way that we can continue these conversations and collectively be solutions focused and come up with some ideas about how we can navigate a shift in culture. Tiffany, you say, could this be a regular conversation with people who are working within this topic as a coach to offer strategies and change the conversation? I mean, these are great ideas. These are great ideas. And this is something that we should, oh, look, Lindsay also said, hey, Jake, we started one. So we can find a way to continue sharing this, this information that's being collected and, I suppose collaboratively shape how we address them and what it looks like. Maybe that's a starting point.
We actually do have a hand raised, so I'll go to Hina Patel for just a minute.
You're
unmuted.
Hi, I love that. Hi. I love that we're talking about constructively finding solutions. I think the one thing that I'm also thinking about is that when it work-life balance and crises, a lot of the conversations I've had with colleagues, their stories have only emerged because we've been in private conversations, right? And so when we're talking about data collection, particularly, or like information gathering, creating a space perhaps more anonymously for people to be able to share some of their challenges.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to feel comfortable in front of your boss. Mm-hmm. Or sharing or it might go back to your boss, right? Of like a struggle that you are facing. So I think that that's also really important to make sure that we are getting sort of the range and the depth of some of these stories and challenges. And I think the only way to really be able to do that is by having a level of an anonymity associated with that sharing.
Absolutely. And we, if anybody wants to keep thinking about it, as we will also, what are some ways that we can create a shared conversation online, because we are all in very different places, that can create that or provide for an anonymous contribution.
Thanks for raising that, Hina. And the community organizer in me is a little bit, I don't want to say digitally adverse, but I am curious about ways in which we can have this conversation in a very human way over a digital platform. So if there are ahas and ideas on that, I'd be really interested to hear what folks have to say, because I do think that in what we're talking about is a paradigm shift. And part of that paradigm shift is about relating to the person, and is about a more responsible human connect. So how can we hold a conversation with that at the heart of it through this medium in a way that is effective? So if folks have ideas around that, I'd be open to hear.
Thanks, Shannon, for ensuring the human element is addressed too. And so I wonder if it's really a combination of different approaches that need to be taken over the course of a year to keep a conversation connected to the people having the conversation, but also providing space for those who do not feel they can speak up publicly.
Yeah, those are all really important points for us to take into consideration, and how do we do that and provide or facilitate some platforms for that happening. So thank you all for that. Really great stuff. We're a little bit up past time. So I just want to take the time now to thank Lindsay, Shannon, and Rena for today's conversation and for helping to raise this issue for us in a very public way at conference, and for helping to work with APEP as we use our resources and generate conversations in the field about this. And thank you all for all of your ideas and insights. They're phenomenal. We will continue to build on that. And our monthly webinar series continues. So stay tuned for when the next webinar will be next month, and we'll be building again on this topic, and we'll look for ways for you to share your ideas for how to continue the conversation, whether it be through Google Docs or whether it be through a Facebook group or other digital platforms. But stay tuned, we'll definitely be in touch. We also would like for you to take a brief survey about today's webinar, so we'll be sending out a link to that, and we'd appreciate your feedback on your experience today. So thanks again from all of us, and have a great day. Thanks again to all of our speakers.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.